Right and all, welcome back to the channel. Mike Ashley has sold Newcastle United at long last to the Saudi Arabia Sovereign Wealth Fund. What does this mean? Where do Newcastle go from here? Are Newcastle genuine title contenders now? Let's discuss that here on the Football Fan Zone. Okay, so for those who haven't really followed the news that closely, some will probably wonder what, because this was a deal that started quite a while ago, and there were hiccups and problems with this deal from the start. So Mike Ashley had been trying to sell Newcastle Football Club for a fee of around about 300 million quid to Saudi Arabia, a sovereign wealth fund, for a number of months. And there have been some political reasons as to why that wasn't able to happen. However, those political reasons we won't get into detail too much because it's a really political channel and I don't want to get involved in the political side of things. But those issues have now been resolved. And there are still lingering issues, or should I say, there's still a fallout from how the Premier League looks with a country with a questionable record on human rights, should we call it? How does this affect the representation, or how does this affect the reputation of the Premier League having such owners now in part of the owner club, if you like? But again, that's a political thing. We won't go, or we won't indulge too much into that. Firstly, what is a sovereign wealth fund? Well, you have to remember these countries: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, etc. Those countries around the Middle East have been heavily reliant on oil over the last 10, 15, 20 years in particular, where their economies have really grown and grown quite quickly. Over the next 20 to 30 years, though, the reliance on oil is going to go down as we move towards greener energy and so on. And so these countries set up sovereign wealth funds. In other words, the country's money is like the income taken from their oil, they put into a fund, and they want to diversify their economy, and so they're using this money to do that. And obviously, moving on to, for example, Dubai has moved on to a lot with tourism, with swanky hotels and shopping centres, theme parks, water parks, etc., etc. And other countries will do, around the area will do probably similar things and other things as well. But with these sovereign wealth funds, they're using these to invest in both internally or domestically in business and whatnot domestically, but also buying out businesses, and in this case, a sports enterprise in Newcastle United. So that is what the sovereign wealth fund primarily is for. So what does this mean for Newcastle United? A lot of people are saying about now Newcastle United are the richest club in the world, and technically, yes, they're not the richest club in the world, but they have the richest owners in the world. So therefore, there's no doubt Newcastle, assuming the owners want to invest in the ambitious way that they've talked about, would mean that they've got substantial amount of money to play with in the coming transfer windows. Now, the first thing to note is in terms of financial fair play, because I think that's the first thing people think of. Well, hang on a minute, you can't just go out and spend hundreds of millions of pounds now because of financial fair play. And yes, that is true. However, bearing in mind Newcastle United are not in any European competition, they haven't been for a number of years. As it stands, the European financial fair play rules do not apply to Newcastle United, first and foremost. The Premier League have their own financial fair play, and for all of the controversies and problems surrounding Mike Ashley's ownership of Newcastle United, one of the things he did do was he run a very sound financial model in which the club operated well within its means, and therefore its loss making was virtually zero. It was very minimal when it did make losses. It was actually quite a profitable club for Mike Ashley. So as a result, then they could spend a lot of money without being in breach of financial fair play over the next 2 or 3 years. And the reason why is because the way financial fair play record looks back at the records, it looks 3 years backwards. So, for example, if they went out and spent a lot of money next summer in their first summer transfer window, those records wouldn't necessarily be looked into for 3 years because you would be looking back 3 years. So, if that more complex than that, I know, but I'm trying to keep it to a basic thing. So as a result, some number crunchers have done their maths and sort of Some of the numbers split about what Newcastle could spend is sort of within the region of 300 to 500 million quid. However, that's over 2 to 3 years, not per year or not in a single year. So that's worth pointing out. Is that going to be enough to make them title challenges? Probably not. Bear in mind, I mean, if they went and spent 500 million quid over the next 3 years, they would still have a squad. Probably, I mean, their squad now is not overly valued, let's be honest. You could certainly argue that they may have, if they spent 500 million quid on top of their current squad, they may have a squad of 650, 700 million quid. Very, very tough, very good squads value that would be. However, it's still well behind the likes of Chelsea, Man United, Man City, and even to a certain extent Liverpool. So there's obviously this is going to be a slow progress, and I know Newcastle fans would like to see them challenge straight away. And certainly if the owners, and it certainly seems like they have got ambition to go and win titles. But even Man City, without the financial play era, back in 2008 when they were taking over, took several years before they went on to win their first Premier League title. So it's not going to happen overnight, and they were starting from a slightly higher point. Chelsea went on to win it within the first couple of years under Abramovich. However, again, no financial fair play at the time, and also they were a team that was arguably fifth best in the country. Newcastle currently sits second bottom without a win so far this season. So we'll go into it in a minute with in terms of likely transfer targets, in terms of not necessarily the individual player, but a type of player. The first thing Newcastle United need to do, though, and I think many people probably agree with this, is they have to resolve the manager situation. It's quite clear, certainly in my opinion. I don't think Steve Bruce is up to the job, in my opinion. He done an okay job last year, but ultimately the football's not particularly great. They're not winning games, and even if Steve Bruce was doing a good job, a lot of owners like to have their own people in charge anyway. It's one of the first things they tend to do. Is to install their own people, So even not just the manager, but at board level, a lot of the board members will probably go, so they can bring in their own board, and the typical sort of thing when you have an ownership or a very high leadership change. So I'm expecting Steve Bruce to be gone relatively soon. The question is who is going to be the manager, and I think this is that will be the first real sign of intent by Newcastle United on who the manager is. A lot of people, certainly Newcastle fans, I think would like Antonio Conte, who is obviously a proven winner, and it would be a big statement if Newcastle United were able to secure his services. However, and this is just my opinion, whilst I think he would be an excellent signing for them, I don't think Newcastle are ready for Antonio Conte. Antonio Conte isn't the sort of person who comes in and builds a team over 3 or 4 years. And again, like I said, this isn't a case of they're going to be looking to challenge next year. It's going to be a process to build up to it. And so, for me, Conte is the sort of person you'd have in 3 or 4 years' time once you've built that team and you're ready to challenge for the title, and you bring in Conte and say, right, there's the tools, go and do the job. So, for me, Conte wouldn't necessarily be the ideal choice if I was the owner. If Newcastle United employed me, they could do. I am open for suggestions. My advice would be to bring someone who has experience and knowledge of building a team, as opposed to picking up the baton from a team that's already there to go and win titles. Some people are looking at the likes of Steven Gerrard, etc. I think Steven Gerrard would be a good choice for the way of football that he plays and so on. Whoever takes the job, though, it's going to be an attractive job because of the funders they're going to have available, the players they're going to be able to attract, and so on and so forth. It would be an exciting job for a manager. In terms of players, again, a lot of people are saying about the likes of Mbappe, Haaland, etc. And again, in my opinion, I think there's probably a little bit too soon for that. I know they would be able to, certainly the money's going to be there and available, but trying to convince people like Mbappe to come to a club who's not playing Champions League football, for example, and there's no guarantees they're going to be in the top 4 next year either. Like I said, this is a process. Even Man City, starting in a sort of a mid-table position, took them a couple of seasons to get into the top 4. If you remember, the season they were really expected to finish top 4, they finished 5th. I remember a crucial game where they lost at home to Spurs, I think, in what was a sort of a top 4, almost like a cup final. So it's not, and also on top of that, the wages. And when we talk about the financial fair play, it's all well and good saying, okay, the next 2 or 3 years they're going to have very relaxed in terms of the financial fair play, and they'll be able to spend a lot of money. However, in 2 or 3 years' time, financial fair play will become an issue, particularly if they're in European football. And it's all well and good and spending the money now, but they have to raise their income, because you could go and spend 300 million quid this summer, but those wages aren't for 1 year. They are for 5 years, for example, if they're on 5-year contracts. So in 3 years' time, you've got to pay those wages, and you've got to have the income that doesn't include the sovereign wealth fund, essentially covering those wages. So bringing on players like Mbappe, who would cost you a lot of money a week, a lot of money. They may be able to get away with financially affording that for a couple of years, but in 3 years' time, they wouldn't be able to, because they would need the income. But they've got no European football, so you guarantee they'll have European football or Champions League football in 3 years' time. And even if they did, their coefficiency ranking would be so low that the amount of income they would get in comparison to teams like Chelsea, United, City, and so on would be relatively smaller because of the coefficiency payments in the Champions League, where Newcastle would be, of course, lowly ranked because they haven't played European football. I think realistically, the sort of players that Newcastle are going to go for would be, I mean, there's been talks of like Anthony Martial, I think Raheem Sterling's been mentioned, Rudiger, who's out of contract at Chelsea at the end of the year. They might be able to prize him away with a good wage packet because there won't be any transfer fee and so on. I think that's the level of play they're looking at. They're not looking at the very creme de la creme, the very world's best, but established, proven, very good Premier League players. And that, in my opinion, is the right way to go. There is simply no point even pursuing the likes of Mbappe and Haaland, etc., just yet. Also, for players that are around the 28, 29-year age mark, if you're a 28, 29-year-old player, you're in a peak of your career, you're one of the best players in the world, are you going to want to go to Newcastle United, regardless of the money they're offering? And the question, the reason why I'd ask that question is because you have to assume that Newcastle are 3 or 4 years away from being at a point where they can perhaps push for a challenge. And if you're 28, 29-year-old, by the time you get to that, you're going to be 32, 33, and you'll be probably past your best. You might not even be at the club by the time they go on to win that first title, if it happens. So you could argue that actually Newcastle probably at this moment in time need players who are, someone like Aubameyang, who Arsenal I'm sure would let go and take his 350 grand a week off the wage bill. Again, he would be a short-term signing, and I think that's what Newcastle need for a year or two. Perhaps in January I would go for players like Aubameyang and so on. The thing is with January transfer window, it's notoriously difficult to get players in, and not just because of clubs to spend the majority of their transfer funds in the summer, but also about clubs willing to let players go throughout the season. If you're a club and you've got a very good player, and you've got a second half of the season to go, and your season's based around having these group of players, you don't want to sell players during January. So it's worth keeping that in mind. So in terms of the transfer strategy for Newcastle, I think it won't be a case of going for the creme de la creme, but perhaps a step or two down. Like I said, Anthony Martial, Raheem Sterling, Aubameyang's been mentioned, Rudiger as well, and so on. These are the sort of players I think that realistically they should be going for. They're known Premier League proven players. They're very, very good Premier League proven players. They're the sort of players that would help you in the next couple of years challenge for European places, and that's the starting point of which they've got to build on. All we can say really is watch this space. It's a long way to go yet. There's not going to be an overnight thing. I also think that the sovereign wealth funds, I think they'll not just invest in the team. I think, if I was a Newcastle fan, I'd be very excited because I think there's going to be a lot of stuff. I think there'll be. I know the stadium's obviously very big. They may look at potentially increasing the size of that. Certainly, the surrounding areas, new training facilities. I dare say they would invest in community services, youth facilities. More youth coaches and getting coaches around into schools and so on. And this is the sort of thing, the community stuff that this sort of money can build in. I know the likes of Chelsea and City have been very much focused on that type of work. So exciting times for Newcastle, not just a football club, but I think the city itself as well. So it's a case of watch your space. Like I said, it's not it's not as easy as a player just go them going out and just buying the world's best players and making a super team. It's going to be a process. It's going to take a few years' time, and obviously it's a step-by-step guide. They'll be starting to, firstly, I think this season has to be, regardless, is to avoid relegation. Next season, it could be a case of, a solid top 10, move in the right direction, and then the season after that, perhaps European spots. This is the sort of thing it's going to be. It's not going to be a title challenges next year. But we'll see how this goes. It's been an interesting story to follow over the next 3 or 4 years. If you like the channel, please remember to click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next video. Take care.